Arizona Territory, 1879. The sun was a hammer in the sky when she fell. 1 second, she was dragging her boots through the desert dirt, her arms wrapped around the swaddled weight of 2 crying infants. The next, her knees buckled, and she went down hard in the dust. She did not get up. Evelyn Embry had walked too far for too long with too little water. Her dress was soaked through with sweat, her lips cracked and bleeding. She had carried her newborn twins across the desert for nearly 2 days, fleeing the past with nothing but a name stitched into her mind like a prayer: Carter Hollis. The babies whimpered weakly beside her on the hot sand. She tried to lift her head, but the world tilted, then dimmed. Just before her eyes closed, she thought she heard hoofbeats. Carter rode that stretch of land once a week, checking cattle fences and water lines. He did not expect to find a woman collapsed in the middle of the desert, let alone one clinging to 2 tiny babies like her life depended on it. He jumped from his horse before it had fully stopped. "Ma'am," he called, crouching beside her. Her skin was hot to the touch, her breath shallow. The babies were still alive, crying softly, their faces red with heat. "God Almighty," he muttered, scooping one baby up, then the other. He draped his canteen over her lips, tipping it gently. She swallowed once, then slipped under again. Carter did not hesitate. He lifted her into his arms. She barely weighed more than the saddle he just dismounted, and settled her across his lap as he climbed onto his horse with all 3 pressed tight against him. "Hold on," he said, though none of them could hear it. The ride back was long and slow. Carter kept one hand on the reins and one arm locked around Evelyn's body, her head resting on his chest, the babies cradled in his coat. When he reached his ranch, he shouted for his sister, June, before he even hit the ground. "I need water, blankets, cool cloths, go," he barked, laying Evelyn down on the cot in the front room. The babies were placed in a basket beside her, their cries growing louder now that they sensed safety. June rushed in, already grabbing what she needed. "Where did you find them?" "Middle of nowhere," Carter said, kneeling beside the cot. "She's burnin' up." June pressed a cloth to Evelyn's forehead. "She's lucky you found her in time. Another hour, maybe less." Carter glanced toward the babies. "They yours?" he asked quietly, not expecting an answer. But Evelyn stirred. "Mine," she whispered, voice hoarse. "They're mine." Her eyes fluttered open, and for a moment, she stared up at him like he was a ghost. "Carter?" she rasped. He blinked. "Do I know you? You helped my father once. 7 years ago. You mended a fence when we were stranded near Yuma. He told me to find you if I ever needed someone good." Carter stared at her. He remembered the man, some old rancher with a busted wagon and a quiet smile. But he had not seen Evelyn then. She would have been, what, 12? 13? "You found me," he said softly. She nodded, tears leaking down her temples. "Rest now," he said, brushing the damp hair off her forehead. "You're safe." It took 3 days for Evelyn to fully wake. By then, the babies were fed and clean and sleeping better. June had taken to rocking them when Evelyn could not. Carter was there every day, checking the fire, bringing water, sitting quiet beside her when she was too weak to speak. On the 4th morning, she sat up slow, holding her side. Carter was on the porch, sanding a piece of wood smooth. "Carter," she called softly. He was at the door in seconds. "You should not be standing." "I need to thank you." "You do not." She smiled, faint but real. "I do. You saved our lives." He looked at her, then really looked. Her hair was still tangled, but her cheeks held color now. She cradled one of the babies in her arms, the other sleeping beside her. She looked like someone who had known pain and chosen to keep going anyway. "What happened?" he asked, stepping inside. Evelyn looked down at her child. "Their father left. Said he was going for supplies. Never came back. I waited 6 days. Then I walked." "Where was that?" "North of Tubac. We were squatting in an old mining shack. That is near 100 miles from here." "I know." Carter sat on the edge of the chair across from her, elbows on his knees. "Why come this way?" "Because I remembered your name," she said, voice trembling. My daddy said you were the kind of man who did what was right, even when no one was looking. He swallowed hard. He was kind to say it. He was right. The baby stirred in her arms, and she hushed him gently. Carter watched the way she moved, tired but steady. She had carried them across the desert with nothing. No food, no help, no protection. Just a mother's will. I do not know what I am going to do, she said, her voice small. You do not have to figure it out today. She looked up at him, eyes brimming. I do not want to be a burden. You are not. She pressed her lips together, then nodded. Thank you. He stood, but paused before stepping away. What are their names? James, she said, touching the baby in her arms. And Jacob. Good names. She smiled again. You are good, Carter. He left the room before she could see the way her words hit. He was not used to praise. Not like that. Not from someone who made his chest ache just by saying his name. That night, Carter sat on the porch staring at the stars. Evelyn stepped out beside him, wrapped in one of June's shawls. The babies were asleep. Mind if I sit? She asked. Please. They sat in silence for a long time. I do not know where I go from here, she finally said. You do not have to go anywhere, he replied, voice low. You can stay. She looked at him, her face soft in the moonlight. You do not even know me. I know enough. Her breath caught. He turned toward her. You walked through hell to protect your sons. That tells me more than any past ever could. Evelyn blinked fast, tears slipping down her cheeks. I do not want to be alone anymore. You are not. She reached out, her fingers brushing his. He took her hand in his, slow and steady. Sleep, he said gently. We will talk more in the morning. She nodded, but she did not let go of his hand. Neither did he. And for the first time in a long time, neither of them felt alone. The chickens had gotten into the kitchen again. Carter was ankle-deep in feathers and scattered flour when Evelyn stepped inside, arms full of linens she'd been folding. She paused, tilted her head at the overturned sack, and raised one brow. You lose a duel in here? He gave the nearest hen a narrow look. June left the back door open. They've got no manners. Evelyn set the linens down and crouched to shoo the birds out with a practiced wave. We had chickens back home. I used to think they were clever. Now I know better. Carter leaned against the table, watching her work. Her hair was pinned back messily, a few strands curling loose around her neck. She moved with a quiet sense of purpose, her hands steady, her voice low as she muttered to the hens like old friends. You're stronger every day, he said. She stood, brushing her skirt. My legs remember what walking feels like, at least. You're not just walking. You're cleaning up after my livestock. She glanced back at him, something dry and amused in her expression. Well, it's not as though I came here with a trade to offer. I can't break horses or run fence. I sew a fair hem, and I can boil coffee without burning it. That's about the sum of it. Don't sell yourself short, Carter said. You managed to tame June's rooster. That's more than I've done. Evelyn's mouth tugged upward, but the smile came slow. It's strange feeling useful again. You never stopped being. She didn't answer right away. Her gaze drifted out the window toward the cottonwoods lining the creek. When I left, I didn't know if we'd make it past the first night. I didn't know if I'd ever get to hold them in a place that felt safe. I still wake up expecting to hear wind through broken boards. Carter stepped closer. You don't have to look over your shoulder here. I know. He nodded toward the hearth. Fire's low. You want to sit. They took places across from each other. The babies napping in the cradle June had found in the loft. The room smelled of bread and wood smoke. Light slanted in through the window, catching on the edges of Evelyn's sleeves. You ever think about leaving Arizona? Carter asked. She considered this. My father always said the land didn't care if you stayed or left. You had to make your own peace with it. Did you? I'm still working on it. Carter folded his hands together. I tried Nevada once. Didn't suit me. Too dry. She gave him a look. Drier than this? Different kind of dry. He shrugged. I came back. Because of the ranch? Because this is the only place I ever felt like something meant to stay. Evelyn's fingers drifted to the edge of the table. You built all this by yourself? Started with nothing but a mule and a shovel. Took 6 years before the house had a roof that didn't leak. She nodded slowly. My husband never stayed in one place that long. Always talking about silver strikes or army contracts. He didn't think much of building things that lasted. You don't speak of him much. I try not to. Carter didn't press further. The silence between them wasn't heavy. It moved like water carried by the crackle of the fire and the soft sighs of sleeping children. I've been thinking about the boys, Evelyn said after a while. Where they'll grow. What kind of life I want for them. They'll have one here if you decide to stay. I don't want them growing up owing anyone. You won't owe me. Not for shelter, not for food. Not for anything. She looked at him then. Her expression unreadable, but something in it was shifting, loosening. Why? He didn't hesitate. Because you asked for help. Because you needed it. Because I wanted to. Her hand reached across the table, fingers brushing his. This time he didn't just take it. He held it with purpose. You're not afraid of what people say? She asked quietly. Let 'em talk. Evelyn's eyes searched his. You sure? Carter leaned forward, voice low and even. I watched you carry 2 children through a country that kills grown men. I watched you wake up night after night just to make sure they were breathing. I've never been more sure of anything. Her breath hitched, but she didn't look away. I don't know what to do with kindness that doesn't come with a price. Maybe just let it stay. Outside, the wind shifted, carrying the scent of mesquite and rain. The season was turning. Carter felt it in the air and in the way Evelyn's hand stayed in his, not tentative now, but anchored. They sat there until the fire burned low again. Neither moved to stoke it. They didn't need to. By the middle of October, the cottonwoods had turned gold and brittle along the dry creek, and the wind carried a cooler bite by sundown. Evelyn stood with her sleeves rolled, wringing out laundry by the well, her fingers stiff from the water. Jacob fussed from the cradle. June had moved to the porch, but James still slept with his thumb tucked under his chin. Carter came from the barn, dust on his shirt, a coil of rope slung over one shoulder. He paused at the edge of the well, watching her twist the last shirt and hang it with a practiced flick. You ever work cattle? He asked. She glanced up, surprised. No, he nodded toward the south pasture. I've got 4 calves need branding before snow comes. Could use a steady hand with the gate? Evelyn wiped her palms on her apron. You trust me not to let the whole lot bolt? I trust you to hold a gate. That's all I'm asking. She followed him across the yard, boots crunching over dry mesquite pods. The boys were left with June, who had taken to them with the quiet stubbornness of someone who'd never claimed to want children and now refused to be apart from them. The corral dust kicked up in little whirlwinds as they approached. Carter handed her a length of chain and pointed to the latch. Don't open till I call. Then swing out just enough for one. What if 2 push through? They won't if I've done it right. She braced her boots and nodded once. All right. He moved with a calm that came from years of working animals that could kill a man without trying. Evelyn watched how he kept his body low, voice steady, the branding iron already heating in the coals nearby. When he called, she lifted the latch clean, let one calf through, and dropped the bar before another could follow. Dust rose in a fine haze as Carter wrestled the animal to the ground with the help of his ranch hand. A Paiute man named Sam who'd worked the place since before the war ended. They worked in rhythm, the cries of the calves sharp but quick. Evelyn didn't flinch. Her hands stayed firm on the gate, her posture unshaken. When the last animal had been marked and turned back into the pen, Carter dusted his palms and came to stand beside her. You done that like you were born to it. I was born to work, she said simply. He gave a quiet nod, then looked past her toward the empty stretch of land beyond the fence line. I've got a parcel over the ridge, never built on it. Good soil, creek runs through most of the year. You thinking of planting? I was thinking of building. She blinked. A barn. A house. Something separate. So you and the boys ain't sleeping where I keep my boots. Her hands stilled where they hung at her sides. You'd do that. I'd help you do it. If you wanted. Evelyn turned to face him fully now. That's not a small offer. I'm not a man for small things. The wind picked up, tugging at her sleeves and brushing hair across her cheek. Carter didn't step closer, but he didn't turn away either. I've never had a place that was mine, she said. Not really. You could. She studied him, slow and thoughtful. You'd share your land with me. I'd share more than that if you let me. Her breath caught, but she didn't look away. You mean it. I don't say things I don't mean. The air between them shifted. Not tense, not urgent, just full. Like something had settled into place without either of them needing to name it. Let me think on it, she said at last, voice quiet. He lifted his chin once. Take all the time you need. She turned toward the house then, walking back with the setting sun behind her. Carter stayed by the fence, hands resting on the rail, watching her go. That night, Evelyn laid both boys down on a quilt June had sewn from old flour sacks. She watched their chests rise and fall, tiny mouths parted in sleep. Then she stepped out onto the porch, arms folded against the chill. Carter was there, sitting on the top step, his hat beside him. I was waiting to see if you'd come out, he said without looking up. I wanted to see the moon. It's near full. Almost. She sat beside him, knees brushing. They didn't speak for a while. I've never been asked, she said finally. What? To build something with someone. Not just live in it. Not just pass through. I'm not asking you to pass through. I know. She paused. I want to stay, Carter. His breath left him slow, like the release of a held storm. Then we'll build it. She leaned against him, her shoulder pressing into his. He set his hand over hers, warm and sure. They said nothing else that night. There was no need. The decision had already been made, and it was written in the way their hands stayed joined long after the stars came out. By early November, Carter's calloused hands were rougher than usual from sawing the foundation beams, and Evelyn had a splinter under her thumb that she refused to let June touch. The new house was taking shape at the edge of the south ridge where the ground sloped gentle and the cottonwoods bowed toward the creek. Carter had staked it out with chalk lines and twine, but Evelyn had chosen the direction of the windows. I want them facing east, she'd said. I want the boys to wake up with light on their faces. He hadn't argued. That morning, she stood with her shawl wrapped tight against a wind that had turned sharper overnight. James lay against her hip, drowsy from nursing, while Jacob slept in a cradle June had dragged out from the main house. Carter was on his knees, fitting floorboards across the joists. You always build barefoot? She asked, eyeing the boots beside him. Not always. But I'd rather feel the boards shift under me than guess. Seems a good way to end up with a nail through your foot. Only if I'm careless. He looked up, sweat already streaking the dust on his brow. You want to try? She blinked. Laying boards. He stood and offered a hand. You said you wanted the house to feel like yours. Can't do that if you don't put your weight on it. Evelyn passed James to June without a word and stepped barefoot onto the frame. The wood was cool and smooth beneath her soles, still damp in places from the early frost. Carter handed her a length of pine, then positioned himself opposite. Set it here, he said, tapping a beam. Then press your heel into the center. You'll feel where it dips. She followed his lead, shifting her stance until the board sat flush. That's it, he said. Feels steadier than I thought. That's the idea. She took a breath, then reached for another. They worked in silence for a while, the wind lifting her skirt around her ankles, the hammer strokes steady but not rushed. After the fifth board, she straightened and rubbed her lower back. I don't see how you do this all day. You get used to the ache. She looked toward the creek, where a flock of sandhill cranes had landed in the reeds. I never thought I'd be building again. Not after Yuma. Carter lowered his hammer. What happened there? My father died. Fever took him first, then the baby we were trying to get to term. My mother went quiet after that. Barely spoke a word the next year. He didn't interrupt. I married the first man who looked me in the eye and said he'd take care of me. Thought that meant something. Carter's voice was low. You don't have to explain anything to me. I want to. She turned to him, her face clear of apology. I want you to know who you're building this with. He stepped closer, eyes steady. Then tell me. She folded her arms. He was clever with words. Always had an excuse. When the money dried up, so did his patience. The boys weren't even a month old before he started talking about leaving. And he did. Yes. Her jaw set. But I already knew how to survive on little. It just took me longer to figure out I didn't have to do it alone. Carter didn't speak for a long moment, then said, You won't have to again. She didn't look away. Do you mean that? I wouldn't have put a single nail in this place if I didn't. The wind shifted again, brushing her hair across her cheek. She didn't move to tuck it back. I want to plant beans along the southern wall, she said. And maybe corn come spring. I'll fence it before the frost sets in. I can help. You will. A faint laugh escaped her, not forced. You don't think I'll slow you down? I think you'll keep pace. They returned to the boards then, fitting each one with purpose, their movements overlapping in quiet rhythm. The shadows stretched long behind them by late afternoon, and the sound of the hammer was the only thing that filled the space between words that didn't need saying. When they broke for supper, Carter didn't walk ahead. He waited beside her, one hand resting lightly on her lower back as they stepped off the frame and onto packed earth. You still planning to put the table by the window? He asked. I am. Then I'll plane the boards for it tomorrow. Her smile was small, but it reached all the way through. This place is going to hold. Carter looked at her, not the house. So are we. She didn't answer, but she didn't need to. Her fingers brushed his just once as they walked back to the main house, dusk settling soft around them. The sky above was pale lavender, the kind that promised a clear night and a morning worth waking up for. The house was finished the same week the last of the geese crossed south beams, sanded smooth, chimney set with stone from the dry wash, and a narrow porch that faced the cottonwoods. Evelyn ran her hand along the cedar lintel, the grain warm beneath her palm even in the chill. Carter stood beside her, wiping mortar dust from his knuckles. You want the key? She glanced over. Do we need one? His shoulders rose in a quiet shrug. Suppose not. Just a habit. She looked back at the doorway, the smell of cured wood and hearth soot still fresh inside. I'd rather we leave it unlocked. Inside, June was laying out the last of the quilts, Jacob in one arm, James curled in a basket by the stove. Evelyn stepped past the threshold and knelt beside the cradle. They've never had a fire that didn't smoke, she said softly. Not till now. June handed her the squirming child. Well, now they've got a stove that draws and a roof that doesn't creak in the wind. I'd call that a start. The baby yawned wide, fists tucked beneath his chin. Evelyn smiled, then looked up at Carter, who leaned in the doorway watching her. That night, they didn't return to the old ranch house. June stayed behind with the boys as they slept, and Carter walked Evelyn out beneath a sky heavy with frost. The moon was a pale sliver, just enough to edge the path in silver. Inside the new house, the fire was low and steady, the bed freshly made. Carter lit a lamp and set it on the table, then turned toward her. You sure you want this? He asked, voice quiet. I wouldn't be here if I wasn't. He nodded once, then removed his boots, setting them by the door. She stepped out of her shawl, folded it neatly, and laid it on the chair. They stood across from each other, the silence gentle but full. I don't want to be careful with you, she said, meeting his eyes. I've had enough of that. I want to be real. You already are, he answered. His hand found hers, rough against smooth. She stepped closer, and he reached to brush his fingers against the side of her face, tracing the line of her jaw as though learning it by memory. They moved together like two people who'd already survived the worst of things. No rush, no fear. Just the slow, certain knowledge of what they were choosing. When dawn touched the edge of the window, they were still wrapped together in the warmth of the wool blankets, her head on his chest, his hand resting over hers. The fire had gone cold, but neither stirred. The new house did not creak in the wind. By the time spring softened the edges of the world, the garden rows behind the house ran straight and deep. Beans had begun to push through, and Evelyn checked them each morning with her skirts tucked high and her hands dark with soil. Carter had built a bench beneath the cottonwood for the boys, who now took their naps in the shade while June read aloud from one of the old almanacs. One afternoon, Evelyn stood beside the fence as Carter finished sinking a new post. She leaned on the rail, arms crossed loosely. "You think they'll remember the shack?" she asked. He shook his head. "They'll remember this." "I hope so. They will." He wiped his hands on a rag. "You still want the east window open?" "I can fix the latch if it's too loose." She smiled, brushing her hair back with the crook of her wrist. "No. I like the way the air moves through. Reminds me the world's still turning." That night, after the boys had been bathed and fed and laid down in the cradle by the hearth, Evelyn stepped out onto the porch where Carter sat with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand. She slid down beside him, her shoulder pressed to his. "I got a letter," she said. "From my mother. Post finally caught up." He turned to her. "What did it say?" "She's remarried. Lives near Prescott now. Wants to meet the boys. You want to go?" Evelyn tilted her head back, watching the stars. "I think I do. Not yet. But soon. I'll take you." "I know." He took her hand and laced their fingers together. She leaned her head against his arm, the air still warm from the day. "I never thought peace would look like this," she said. "It always looked like you to me." She looked up at him, the shadows softening her features. "You love me, don't you?" "I always will." There was nothing hurried in the kiss. Just warmth and the slow, steady promise of a life they'd already begun to build. Years passed. The boys grew tall and tanned in the sun, helping with the fence line and driving cattle by the time they were 9. June stayed on, never marrying, but keeping the garden thriving and the stove hot through every season. Evelyn taught them to read beneath the cottonwoods, her hand firm on the page, her voice low but sure. Carter never left the ridge. He didn't need to. The land held him, and what he'd built with it was enough. The east window stayed open every morning, and the house never once needed a key. They grew old side by side, their love not loud or showy, but rooted deep, like the trees that bent toward the creek and never broke. It was the kind of life that held, the kind that healed, and they lived it all together.